Hello everyone, it's Dr. Lily Hatami. In this video, we're gonna go over the anatomy and physiology of the skeletal system, which consists of cartilages and bones. The cartilage is a supportive connective tissue which does not have any blood vessels. It's the only avascular connective tissue. But how does cartilage receive its nutrients? Cartilage gets nutrients by diffusion from the capillaries in precondyrium. Chondro means cartilage and pre means around. Precondyrium is a dense connective tissue around the cartilage which contains blood vessel. The cartilage gets nutrients by diffusion through this membrane. Cartilage has no nerve innervation, so there is no sensation when it is injured or damaged. So don't forget, there is two no for cartilage: no blood vessel and no nerves. The cartilage is a connective tissue, and as you remember, we discussed about the structure of connective tissue, which it contains cells and extracellular matrix. The cells can be found in cartilage is chondroblast and chondrocytes. The extracellular matrix of cartilage is secreted by chondroblasts, which are found in the outer covering layer of cartilage. As the chondroblasts secrete the matrix and fibers, they become trapped inside it and mature into the cells called chondrocytes. So at first we have chondroblast, and then they're gonna become chondrocytes, which we have chondrocyte in its space within the matrix. We call this as lacunae. Cartilage is a tissue found in many areas of the body, including joints, between bones in elbow, knee, ankle joint, wrist joint, shoulder joint, and also ends of ribs, which we call them as costal cartilages, or between the vertebrae. So in this image, you can see there are three types of cartilage in our body, which you can find them with different colors. The hyaline cartilage in blue color, you can find them in respiratory tract such as larynx and trachea. Costal cartilage, cartilage of the nose, and also the articular cartilages are hyaline cartilage. Next is elastic cartilage, which you can find with the green color. Cartilage in external ear and epiglottis are the example of elastic cartilage. Fibrocartilage with red color you can find between vertebrae, intervertebral disc, and also between right and left hip, the pubic symphysis, and also in the knee joint, the menisci are the type of fibrocartilage. All types of cartilage act as a cushion to absorb shock, and their resiliency allows them to be deformed by pressure and return to their original shape when the pressure is removed. There are three types of cartilage present in the body. The hyaline cartilage is the most abundant cartilage in our body. It has very thin collagen fibers, so very thin or fine collagen fibers, which is the thinnest or the weakest collagen fibers. That's the reason our hyaline cartilage is the weakest of the three types of cartilages. Where can we find hyaline cartilage? The articular cartilages found in the joints are hyaline cartilage. Costal cartilages between the ribs and sternum, respiratory cartilage found in larynx and trachea. Nasal cartilage found in nose of tip. They are examples of hyaline cartilage. The second type of cartilage is elastic cartilage, which is similar to hyaline cartilage but contains elastic fibers within the extracellular matrix of this type of cartilage, which is found in external ear and epiglottis. Fibrocartilage is the third type of cartilage in our body. There are bundle of thick collagen fibers which it gives a lot of strength to this type of cartilage. That's the reason our fibrocartilage is the strongest of the three types of cartilage. In intervertebral disc, menisci of knee, symphysis pubis, we can find fibrocartilage. In this image, you can see a photomicrograph of hyaline cartilage from a costal cartilage of a rib. So here you can find the matrix, which we have the chondrocytes inside of this space. We call it as lacunae. So this whitish space is called lacunae. And the cells inside of the lacunae is called chondrocytes. As you remember, we discussed about the cartilage structure, which it has cells and extracellular matrix. The extracellular matrix is made by chondroblast, and we have chondrocyte within the matrix. The hyaline cartilage job is to support and reinforces, and also it serves as resilience cushion, resist compressive stress. It forms most of the embryonic skeleton, covers the ends of long bones in joint cavities, form costal cartilages of the ribs, cartilages of the nose, trachea, and larynx. Elastic cartilage is similar to hyaline cartilage. It has matrix, and also we can find chondrocyte in lacunae, but in matrix we have a lot of elastic fibers. The elastic cartilage maintains the shape of a structure while allowing great flexibility because of having elastic fibers. We can find elastic cartilage in external ear and also the epiglottis. The next is fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage is the strongest cartilage. Its matrix similar to the other cartilages but less firm than that. In hyaline cartilage, it has very thick collagen fibers. So it's very similar to the dense regular connective tissue, which we can find many collagen fibers, but there are chondrocytes inside of the lacunae. Because it has the thick collagen fibers, tensile strength allows it to absorb compressive shock. So we can find them in their location when they are exposed to a lot of pressure, like intervertebral discs, pubic symphysis, and disc of knee joint, which is called menisci. Growth of cartilage. Unlike other connective tissues, cartilage is avascular. Cartilage is nourished by diffusion from nearby capillaries in the precondyrium. So when we have the cartilage, around the cartilage is a connective tissue, which we call this as precondyrium, and in precondyrium there are a lot of capillaries which is going to nourish the cartilage. So therefore cartilage can never become very thick because diffusion will not be sufficient to supply the cartilage with nutrients and oxygen. This is in contrast to bone, because bone has a very good blood supply. So cartilage can grow in two ways: appositional growth and interstitial growth. In appositional growth, the point is that When we have a cartilage like this, a cartilage is surrounded by connective tissue, which we call as perichondrium. Perichondrium, which it means the connective tissue around the cartilage. In perichondrium, there are some cells, which we call them as cartilage forming cells. These cartilage forming cells secrete matrix against the external surface. In this way, the new matrix laid down on surface of cartilage. The next type of growth of cartilage is interstitial growth. In this type of cartilage growth, we have the cartilage, which inside of the cartilage we have matrix and chondrocytes inside of the lacunae. These chondrocytes inside of the lacunae in the very young cartilages, they are able to divide. So through mitosis, they can divide and make the other chondrocyte. So then these cartilage expanding from within. It means the new matrix made within the cartilage. So let's review it one more time. The appositional growth, new surface layer of matrix are added to the pre-existing matrix by the cartilage forming cells from the perichondrium. So presence of perichondrium is very important in appositional growth. In interstitial growth, chondrocytes grow and divide and lay down more matrix inside the pre-existing cartilage. This mainly happens during childhood when the cartilages are young and the chondrocytes are able to divide. In this image, you can see the appositional and interstitial growth. So interstitial growth happens within the matrix, and appositional growth happens in the perichondrium, the surface of the cartilage. Now it's time to check your understanding. Please read the questions and answer them. Now we're going to talk about the bone tissue. The bone tissue is also called osseous tissue, as os means bone. We have osteoblast as bone cell, osteocyte, osteon, preosteum. So os means bone. If we want to compare bone tissue with cartilage, in bone tissue there are more collagen fibers than cartilage, and bone tissue is harder than cartilage tissue because it also has inorganic calcium salts, which it gives the bone tissue the hardness. The type of cells we have in bone tissue, like osteoblasts, they are responsible to produce matrix, which is fibers and ground substance, and osteocytes, they are not responsible to produce matrix, but their job is to maintain matrix. Osteons are the name for structural units of bone tissue. Can you believe that there are a lot of blood vessels in bone tissue? They are richly vascularized. Let's talk about the functions of bones. The bone tissue has several functions. It supports and protects the soft tissues and delicate structures such as brain, heart, lungs, and the vital organs. It works with the skeletal muscle to generate movement. Bone stores calcium and phosphorus. It houses the red bone marrow, which produces blood cell. So it's involved in blood cell formation or hematopoiesis. Bone houses the yellow bone marrow, which is a storage site for fat or triglyceride as energy source. As an endocrine tissue, bone produces osteocalcin hormone and release this hormone to the blood to regulate bone formation. So as you can see, bone has different functions: support and protection, movement. It can be as a storage for mineral and growth factor. It can be as a storage for fat or triglyceride, and also is involved in hematopoiesis, blood cell formation, and as an endocrine tissue, it can produce hormone. Bones, we have bone as tissue and bone as organ. Bone tissue as one of our connective tissue, which is a supporting connective tissue. Also, we have bone as organs. In our body, there are 206 bones, which make our skeleton, like humerus bone, radius bone, femur bone, temporal bone. Each of them is an organ because they contain different type of tissues: bone tissue, nervous tissue, cartilage, fibrous connective tissue, muscle, and epithelial cells in its blood vessels are the different type of tissues which we can find in bone as an organ. Let's talk about the classification of bones. As I mentioned before, there are 206 bones in our skeleton. We can divide our skeleton into two groups: axial skeleton and appendicular skeleton. Axial skeleton is composed of skull, vertebral column, and rib cage, which you can see in this image with the blue color. Skull, vertebral column, and rib cage are part of our axial skeleton. The appendicular skeleton is composed of bones of upper and lower limbs, and also the girdles attaching limbs to axial skeleton. This blue color shows the appendicular skeleton. Also, we can divide the bones by their structure. Structurally, bones are two types: compact bone and spongy bone. Compact bone is dense and solid in appearance. We can find the osteans or Haversian system in compact bone. So the only place we can find the ostean and Haversian system is compact bone. The other type of bone is cancellous bone or spongy bone. Their main feature is that they have the needle-like structures, which is called trabeculae, with open spaces filled with red bone marrow. There is another classification of bones by their shape. We have long bones, short bones, flat bones, and irregular bones. The long bones, like the bones we have in our upper limb and lower limb, like humerus bone in our arm, the femur bone is in our thigh, they are longer than they are wide. Short bones, which can be found in our wrist and ankle area, they are cube-shaped bones. And also under short bones, there are the other category of bones which we call them as sesamoid bones. Sesamoid bones are the short bones within tendons. The most important sesamoid bone in our body is the patella. Patella or kneecap bone is the sesamoid bone. The other type of bones by shape is flat bones, which these bones are thin, flat, and slightly curved. So we can find them in sternum and also most of our cranial bones like our frontal, temporal, parietal bones. Occipital bones are flat bones. Our ribs are flat bones, and also scapula, the shoulder blade bone, is a flat bone. Irregular bones are the bones they have a complicated shapes. They are not long, short, or flat. The vertebrae and also the hip bone and some of the cranial bones like as sphenoid and ethmoid bones, they are irregular bones. In this image, you can see a long bone, such as humerus, femur, or even our finger bones are long bones. Let's look at the structure of a typical long bone. A long bone has two main regions, the diaphysis and the epiphysis. The diaphysis is the hollow tubular shaft that runs between the proximal and distal ends of the bone. Inside the diaphysis, there is a medullary cavity which is filled with yellow bone marrow in an adult. The outer wall of the outer wall of the diaphysis is composed of compact bone. The next is epiphysis. The epiphyses are the ends of long bone. We have proximal epiphyse and distal epiphyse. Proximal epiphyse is the ending of long bone near the trunk, and the distal epiphysis the ending region of long bones far from the trunk. The epiphysis is filled internally with spongy bone. Red bone marrow fills the spaces between the spongy bone. During growth, there is an epiphyseal plate between the epiphysis and diaphysis of long bones. The epiphyseal plate is a site of long bone elongation. Epiphyseal plate. When the bone stops growing in early adulthood, approximately 18 to 21 years, the epiphyseal plate becomes bony, which is called epiphyseal line. In cartilage, we talked about perichondrium. If you remember, perichondrium, it was a dense connective tissue surrounding the cartilage. In bone, we have the similar structure, which we call this as periosteum. Peri means around, and os means bone. So periosteum is a dense, irregular connective tissue around the bone. It covers the external surface of bone except the joint surfaces. Also, in the periosteum, we can find some osteogenic cells, which they are stem cells. They are able to divide and differentiate to other cells. And also, there are many nerve fibers and blood vessels in periosteum. If we look at the inside of the bone, the internal bone surface, at internal bone surface, there is a delicate connective tissue which is going to cover the internal bone surface. It's called endosteum. So end means inside and os means bone. It's a connective tissue covering the inside of the bone or internal bone surface. It also covers the trabeculae of a spongy bone. We can find the stem cells like osteogenic cells in this endosteum as well. Let's talk about the hematopoietic tissue in bones. What is the hematopoietic tissue? This tissue gives rise to blood cells in process of hematopoiesis. In this tissue, there are hematopoietic stem cells. Hemato means blood. Poietic means producing. The hematopoietic stem cells found in this tissue. In newborns, the medullary cavities and all the spongy bone contain red marrow, which in red marrow or red bone marrow, we have hematopoietic tissue. So the medullary cavity and all the spongy bones red marrow are active in hematopoietic, in blood cell formation. What about in adults? In adults, the red marrow becomes the yellow marrow, which is a fat tissue, and it's not anymore active in blood cell formation. So in adults, red marrow is located in some specific areas for our long bones, such as heads of femur and humerus. So it means in their proximal epiphysis of femur and humerus, which we have spongy bone, and also the flat bones and some irregular bones, they are the areas which they are active in hematopoiesis. Let's look at the structure of short, irregular, and flat bones. So far we talked about the structure of long bones, which they have the diaphysis, epiphysis, and medullary cavity, periosteum, and endosteum. But now let's look at the structure of short, irregular, and flat bones. These bones don't have the diaphysis or epiphysis, and also they don't have a marrow cavity. They look like a sandwich, which in center we have this spongy bone. So this is a spongy bone in center, which it has some like the spaces, which inside of these spaces there are red marrow responsible for blood cell formation. So here we have the spongy bone, and at both sides of the spongy bone there is layer of compact bone, which it makes it like a sandwich. In the middle we have spongy bone, and in both sides we have compact bone. But still we have periosteum and endosteum as the connective tissue, which is going to cover the outer layer and inner layer of these bones. Now it's time to check your understanding. Please read this question and answer to them. Now we're going to talk about the microscope anatomy of bone tissue. As we discussed before, bone tissue is a supporting connective tissue. We defined cells and extracellular matrix for connective tissue. Now we have to define cells and extracellular matrix for bone tissue as well. Let's look at the cells we have in bone tissue. There are 5 types of cells: osteogenic cells, osteoblasts, osteocytes, bone lining cells, and osteoclasts. It's so descriptive, their name. Os, it means bone. So when you see the cells with os, you should know that they belong to bone tissue. Let's look at each of them. Osteogenic cells. They also called as osteoprogenitor cells. These are the stem cells which are active in mitosis. Where can we find this type of stem cells in bone? We can find them in periosteum and endosteum. You should remember these two membranes, periosteum and endosteum. They are connective tissue covering the outer and inner layer of the bone, which inside of these connective tissues we can find stem cells. We name them as osteoprogenitor cells or osteogenic cells. They are able to divide and differentiate into other cells like osteoblasts and bone lining cells. This is the image of osteogenic cell. The other type of cell which is very important in our bone tissue is osteoblast. The osteoblast, it means bone forming cells. They are responsible to produce organic matrix of bone. What does it mean, organic matrix of bone? It means the collagen, the fibers, and ground substance that we can find in the matrix of bone. Or it means the unmineralized bone matrix. So osteoblasts are the bone forming cells which their job is to produce osteoid. Do not forget the osteoid. Osteoid, it means the unmineralized bone matrix. Which cells are responsible to produce osteoid? Osteoblast. You can see the image of osteoblast here, which are responsible for synthesis of matrix osteoid, which includes collagen and also some calcium binding proteins. The collagen is 90% of our bone protein. The other type of cells in bone tissue is called osteocytes. Osteocytes are mature cells, which means they are not able to divide through the mitosis. And also we can find them in lacunae. Do you remember what other cell we can find in lacunae? Yes, chondrocytes. So lacunae is the characteristic of bone tissue and also cartilage. In bone tissue, we have osteocyte in lacunae. In cartilage, we have chondrocyte. Exactly like chondrocyte, osteocytes do not produce matrix, but they are responsible to maintain matrix, which it means if we remove the osteocyte from the bone tissue, we're gonna destroy the matrix because their job is to monitor and maintain the bone matrix. The other type of cells of bone tissue is bone lining cells. They are flat cells which we can find them on bone surfaces. They also can help maintain matrix. There are two types of bone lining cells. We have periosteal cells if they are on external bone surface. We have endosteal cells if they are lining the internal surfaces of bone. The other important cells of bone tissue is called osteoclast or bone resorbing cell. They are the cells which gonna destroy the bone. So far we talked about bone forming cell, which is osteoblast, and now we are talking about bone resorbing cell, which is osteoclast. Look at this cell. It's a very huge cell. It has a lot of nucleus, which we call this as giant cell. And it also has large numbers of mitochondria and lysosome. They're going to release their lysosomal enzyme, which are the hydrolytic enzymes out of the bone to destroy the bone matrix. The osteoclast origin is different with other cells we have in our bone tissue. They are derived from hematopoietic stem cells that become macrophages. Now it's time to look at compact bone under the microscope. A compact bone consists of osteans or Haversian system. Osteans or Haversian systems. Look at this picture. In this picture, you can see an ostean, a part of ostean. And in this picture, you can see many ostean or Haversian system. Each ostean, it has a center, which in the center, there is a canal, which we call this canal as central canal. So the central canal or Haversian canal. In central canal or Haversian canal, there is nerve, vein, and artery. Around the central canal, there are rings of matrix, rings of concentric matrix. Between the rings of matrix, the bone cells, which are called osteocytes, are located in spaces called lacunae. This is another view of compact bone, which you can see a Haversian canal, Haversian system or ostean. So this is the Haversian canal or central canal, which we have the structures like artery, vein, and nerve inside of it. And around the central canal, there are lamellae, the concentric rings of matrix, which is going to be our collagen fibers, which we have them in different directions. Between these rings or lamellae, there are the osteocytes. So here we go. We have all the information here. For compact bone, we have the ostean, lamellae, which is concentric, cylinder-shaped layer of calcified matrix, lacunae, which they are small spaces, which we have the osteocyte inside of the lacunae, osteocytes, and also in the center of ostean there is Haversian canal or central canal, which extends lengthwise through the center of each ostean and contains blood vessels like artery and vein, and also lymphatic vessels and nerve. There is another structure for our ostean as well, canaliculi. The canaliculi are the ultra small canals radiating in all directions from the lacunae and connecting them to each other and to the Haversian canal. You can see the ostean in this image, the Haversian canal in the center of each ostean, and also the osteocyte around this central canal. So these osteocytes, which they are close to the central canal, they easily can get their nutrients from the artery and then remove their waste products through this vein. But what about these osteocytes, which they are very far from the central canal? Can they get nutrients through diffusion? The answer is no. Why? Because the bone matrix is ossified. It's very hard and there is no way that nutrients can reach to these cells through diffusion. That's the reason of having canaliculi, which these microscopic canals between the osteocyte and also the Haversian canal. So through these very, very small canals, the osteocyte can pick up the material from the blood vessels in central canal and then distribute them to the other osteocyte. These are the canaliculi function. Now it's time to study the microscopic anatomy of spongy bone. We talked about the microscopic anatomy of the compact bone. The compact bone main feature is having osteon, but there is no osteon in spongy bone. Spongy bone or cancellous bone is lighter and less dense than compact bone. And spongy bone consists of plates, which we call them as trabeculae, and the bars of bone adjacent to small irregular cavities that contain red bone marrow. Now it's time to look at the chemical composition of bone. We can divide the bone to two components: organic components and inorganic components. Organic components of bone include cells and osteoid. We talked about the cells: osteogenic cells, osteoblasts, osteocytes, bone lining cells, and osteoclasts. We introduced their shape, their function in the bone. But what about the osteoid? Osteoid is the 1/3 of organic bone matrix, which the osteoblasts are responsible to produce osteoid. The osteoid is made of ground substance, which is the protoglycan and glycoprotein molecules, and also they have collagen fibers. The collagen fibers give strength and flexibility to the bone. The other chemical composition of bone, which is inorganic components, it actually is responsible for hardness and resistance to compression for our bone. The inorganic components of bone is called hydroxyapatites, which is mineral salts. It composes of 65% of bone mass, and it's mainly calcium phosphate crystals in and around the collagen fibers. Now it's time to check your understanding. Please read these questions and answer to them. Thank you for watching this video.